everybody. Hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm really happy to be sitting here with, can I get this right, Roger Joseph Manning Jr.
That's correct.
You know why I did that? Because I was talking to these guys and I wanted to give them some background because they're all 25 years old or younger. And I went Roger Manning, and it's like acoustic metal, I don't know what it came up, but it certainly wasn't you. I was like, huh?
Well, there's another gentleman that is my age, roughly.
Oh.
Who just went by Roger Manning.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that's why I use my full name.
Oh.
He was part of the neo-folk movement of the late 80s, early 90s.
Great.
Of which Beck was a part of.
Ah.
And Beck actually, when Beck moved to New York as a young man, befriended him, slept on his couch, they became buddies.
Wow.
Beck comes back to LA, his career takes off. I joined his band a few albums later, and he goes, what are the odds of 2 Roger Mannings in my life?
I agree.
And solo stuff was starting to take off for me at the time, and I was doing remixes and so forth. And I was like, I don't want any confusion here. Let him have his world. Because, right, all the websites were starting to get us confused.
Oh, I see. All music.
So this isn't some pretentious thing that
I don't
this
think
is
it's
going to be
pretentious.
a great business move. It's so long-winded, but it works.
Well, I like it. Hey, I grew up with Roy Thomas Baker.
Yeah, I was going to say it's more British.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. And you put the junior on the end, so I'm assuming that is your full father's name.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is a privilege to talk to you. We off camera have been bonding over the fact that we both love pretty much exactly the same music.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
But
yeah.
odds are, yes.
Odds are
in our
so
favor.
far. Now, for me, and I've already said this, but just to sort of fanboy it a bit, being in England in the late 80s and early 90s, the bands that mattered to us and why we created music were, of course, like World Party and XTC, and then which were the 80s bands and the late 70s bands. But then, of course, we had wonderful stuff like ELO, Queen for me, Supertramp, always going back to the Beatles. And to me, that felt like a logical step. You had Beatles, 10cc, Supertramp, ELO, Queen, XTC, World Party, and then you guys came along.
Thank you, sir. I mean, right, you could oversimplify it by saying, well, it's all post-Beatles school.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there was a lot of joy and fulfillment to be derived from that school of songwriting. That again, the Beatles would be the first to admit, hey, we were just going for Buddy Holly and Everly Brothers. And it's just this continuation of what can I say in roughly 3.5 minutes that's catchy, that may usually wanted to uplift me and make me want to dance. It was joyful, it could be tough, and the lyric was fun, or then slightly thought-provoking, but all this fun arena to play within. And then you see the evolution, like you said, of that. Queen, ELO, XTC, Cheap Trick.
Oh yeah, we could talk about Cheap Trick as well.
Todd, I mean, on and on and on.
Utopia, yeah.
And 10cc. These are realms, not solely that have inspired me, but have been a huge influence and inspiration on what I've chosen to do.
Well, I remember hearing like the Paisley Underground stuff, and I really liked that. And there was some really good stuff. However, it did seem like it was a retro thing.
So you mean the American movement that happened like early and mid 80s?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I got to subsequently in the 90s when I moved here get to work with Susanna Hoffs. And,
amazing.
And I got to learn more about that even more than I knew coming from England. I liked it, but it definitely felt retro. It definitely felt like it was...
It was deliberately retro. I mean,
exactly.
You excelled in that arena. I can speak firsthand because I was unaware of it, or that it was such a movement when I came down to Los Angeles to go to college in '84. And I had just missed the first wave of it, but it was starting to explode with the 3 o'clock. Bengals were getting more and more attention. And so it was like any scene, any genre. 5% of it, epic.
Yeah.
Unbelievable songwriting, high art, mastery. I can't believe this is going on. And then the other 95% was like, it's filler.
Yeah.
And I always say, disco, it had its 5% of brilliance.
Absolutely.
Punk, it had its 5% and the rest was just kind of, but those 5%, that's what steered and influenced and moved stuff. And the Paisley Underground movement of Los Angeles, of which a lot of the world is unprivy to, was a huge influence on me. A band called Red Cross grew out of that. There was a band I played in called the Corsairs, who were a trio before they decided to expand. We want to add some keyboards. I joined these guys when I was 20 years old. They were all 24, 25, 26. They schooled me on all the bands of the 60s that I was unaware of. And these guys showed me how to write like the Hollies. They showed me how to harmonize like the Hollies.
Amazing.
This is how you impress the girls in that scene. If you could do 3-part harmony effortlessly. If you could write these pop songs, these psych pop songs that were reminiscent of Pretty Things and Pink Floyd and all these inspirational bands here in Los Angeles. Obviously a lot of Anglo influence, right? Well,
Which were all stolen from you anyway.
I know, the back and forth is just phenomenal, and so many great things have come from it. But my brief tenure with that group, experience with that group was, gosh, maybe a year. And I learned more about what would facilitate my dreams and goals in life than any music college course I took, because these guys were in the trenches learning off the records, and anyway, but the Paisley Underground here in LA was very important for me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But for us, when we first heard Jellyfish, it just seemed like a natural progression because, yeah, you wore your influences on your sleeve, but you could never pinpoint anything and say, oh, that's taken from this or that's taken from that. That's what we love about all the bands that we're name checking, is that you hear the influences and you understand where it comes from, but they take it somewhere else. And we were doing some playback with the guys here so they could hear Jellyfish, and I pointed out to them, like, McFly had a #1 hit in 2007?
The first time I heard that band name for so long, but I now remember who you're talking about.
Yeah, with one of your songs. And that was a #1 in England and several other European countries. So it's like, even though at the time it wasn't embraced, the songs, in the way it should have been, the songs were absolutely timeless. And for us in England, it made perfect sense because you guys had Belly Button and then Spilt Milk. But then we had Modern Life is Rubbish came out, I think, like the end of the same year, the end of the same year as Spilt Milk, and that was like amazing, and it just added together. And of course, Goodbye Jumbo was from the late 80s. It was all just like this natural.
First Supergrass album.
Yeah, first Supergrass albums. I mean, it was
and
just...
many of the records, but I mean, that was like 94, roughly, when Park Life is coming out.
Yeah.
Good stuff at a time that it restored my faith and hope, and where certainly my generation or people in my age group were moving music. And Andy and I were very aware, and the other very talented gentlemen that came in and out of the group were very aware of wearing our influences on our sleeves, so to speak, and the fun we had with appearance and videos and our artwork. But it was all, ultimately at its core, it was all about simply not reinventing the wheel. We were interested in continuing into a tradition that we had been born into. And I remember growing up as a young songwriter, this kind of awakening where your goal is to write something as good as your heroes. Mm-hmm. And I ran into a lot of people who were like, well, I can never write a song as good as this. I can never write a song as good as this. And I was like, but these were just other people trying to write songs as good as Buddy Holly or Brian Wilson or any of their heroes. And coming to terms with the fact that there was nothing wrong, you could absolutely aspire to something that great, but have originality to it. Mm-hmm. And so all we ever wanted was to just continue in that tradition and certainly say, hey, we wrote songs that are, in our minds certainly, or we wouldn't be sharing them with everybody, as good as this person gave us, as good as this hero, as good as this idol of ours, And there was no single band that did that more for me than any other group than Andy Partridge and Colin and their comrades. Not only in terms of songwriting, but how to then develop those songs, produce them, arrange them, and present them to the world. And they were one of my favorite live bands until they stopped playing. I never saw them live, but I collected as much rare video as I could and would just have my mind blown at the energy, because
everything. I mean,
yeah.
Dave Gregory. I mean, just like,
you lose your brilliant keyboard player, you need to find a replacement. How are you going to do it? And then it's like this giant hand from heaven just comes down and goes, well, here, use this guy.
It's just
He's in your backyard.
It's insane. And for like Swindon, I mean, Swindon is like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like, find a town, it's just the most random place. But yeah, Black Sea and English Settlement to me, I mean, all of her records are amazing, but those two albums are just mind-blowingly good.
Yep.
Song after song after song. Production is insane. That we were talking about earlier, it was like Hugh Padgham at his like absolutely artistic peak. The drum sounds are just to die for. The drum techniques that he came up with in the townhouse of, you know, overdubbing the cymbals with the massive room tones. And
well, you know, for that camp that's watching that isn't as enthusiastic about the world of XTC as us, or discovered them at some point and value what they gave us. For many people, they assume, no, it's all about skylarking, oranges and lemons, that very Beatley stuff, because that's what we liked. They really owned their Beatle influence and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I totally agree, those albums were wonderful, but the thing that got under my skin was that youthful post-British glitter punk energy that they were teenagers during, and then as young men in their 20s, they give us Drums and Wires and Black Sea right after it. And it's so infused with this youthful rebellion, teenage energy, right? There's just as much of the Clash and what's going on with them as there is Paul McCartney or Syd Barrett. Yeah. And that fusion is not only highly original to me, but is the best way. I love that how it encapsulates and presents that teenage, youthful abandonment.
See, at the moment, all I want to do is go running into the other room and bring out my vinyl of Dukes of Stratosphere.
Oh, yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
Yep.
And another reason why I worship at the chapel of John Leckie. Yep. He is definitely my favorite producer. I feel like he seems to have, he's got his name on like all these, the Bends we were talking about earlier. But then he also happened to be an engineer on All Things Must Pass.
Yeah.
And I believe he was one of the engineers on Abbey Road. I mean, it's just like, he crops up everywhere.
Oh, it's crazy.
He did Cooler Shaker's first record. He did the Stone Roses' first album.
He's on he did Posey's Dear 23 album. I believe that's the one he did. He almost did Imperial Drag's record. If you're
really?
familiar with
we haven't got there
Jellyfish
yet in your
album.
career. In your career, that would have been. So what happened?
I spoke to him on the phone. By some miracle, our A&R guy had actually hunted him down as an option because he was still flying high. I think he was flying post-Benz. So he had gotten another, it was like his third wind. Used John Leckie. It's phase 4 of his relaunch for another generation who hadn't discovered him. Super eager to talk to him on the phone. And what ended up happening was my partner and I, Eric at the time, were really enjoying, again, another version of youthful teen pop rock energy in the form of a lot of young girl groups, Ronettes, MC5, just different versions of teenage rebellion throughout the years. How it was more than just garage. There had to be like a pop component to it, right? So some of our music reflected this, and his biggest concern was, I love what you guys are doing, but it's just too damn kitschy in that respect. And I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, I'm going to be concerned with divorcing you of this or trying to convince you to. And I was too taken aback that he was going to water down this spirit that I was so desperately trying to infuse with my comrades in the group. And so, hey, fine, we had an incredible conversation, but it just ended up being artistic differences at the end of the day. And so it didn't pan out.
I bet in retrospect now you love him more for it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just mad respect. In fact, I've been going back.
It's about the art, not about the check.
Exactly. And a good buddy of mine, an old college friend of mine, who was very much part of my XTC discovery at the time, turned me on to the 4-segment set on YouTube of John Leckie and Andy Partridge reviewing the inspiration for all the Dukes of Stratosphere stuff. And to get lost in that world again through not only the songwriter's eyes, but the guy who was kind of the 5th member, like, you want to bring me in and do what? What are we doing again here? And trying to make the most of it, have fun with it, and how can I contribute to what are now legendary albums, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely insane. So I've got like a million things I want to go on now.
I'm fine to talk with 4 hours that you can edit down to 40 minutes, because if you find somebody who you share a lot of the same territory, it's suddenly how novel is that?
Absolutely. I would argue that being friends and being around with so many people in the quote-unquote Britpop scene, you guys, whether you realize it or not, were a big part of it, because you were reinforcing what was growing, especially with Spilt Milk. As you said, Spilt Milk charted top 40, it was like 20 or something like that. It charted really well in England. You had a bunch of singles on the radio, and like you were saying, it was sort of, could have been the start of something pretty massive. And it was just a perfect storm, because everything that came out after you was very much in the same, world. Yeah, I remember that show with the Lemon Trees at the Clapham Grand that we were talking about. And that was with, at that point, it was with, I don't know who was playing bass. It wasn't Jason, it was Steve touring with it?
Sorry, in Spilt Milk?
Yeah, on Spilt Milk.
No, it was Tim Smith.
Tim Smith, that was it. Sorry, Tim.
Yep.
Tim Smith and with Eric, and just the harmonies were amazing. And I just seen the Lemon Trees, which for those people that don't know was Guy Chambers' band, and they were fantastic.
And the Stacey Brothers.
And the Stacey Brothers, who even at that stage owned England. They were pretty much on everybody's record. They were the main session players in town.
Which of course we didn't know at the time. We were introduced to all these folks on that tour, and we're just like, this is nuts.
You've probably worked with Jeremy 100 times since, haven't you?
I wish it was 100 times. I've certainly have worked with him over the years. We're still friends. We still stay in touch. In fact, I have the proud moment of being able to share that Eric Dover, Tim Smith, and I have all formed a side project.
Fantastic.
Of original material. I wish I had a name to share with the world. We're still in find a name mode. But of course, that's 2 guitarists, bassists, and a keyboard player, no drummer. I mean, I play drums, but not as well as I'd like to. So we called up Jeremy, because Tim is super good friends with him. I mean, Tim played in the Finn Brothers tours with him. I've known him forever. He was
There's another band we should have inserted in conversation. Crowded House, and Crowded House.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I can't believe it. When I was going through all those bands, I missed it out. I mean...
You're right.
When Woodface came out, that was like perfect timing. That was just like when they got back together for that album. I remember listening to It's Only Natural, and I had an old player where you could stack the 7 inches. So all I did, you remember you'd take the arm off and it'd replay the same song over and over again? Yeah, I think It's Only Natural was played for like 2 days solid.
Well, so there would be no Jellyfish without the second Crowded House album. First of all, any Crowded House album, but that second one was just like, we can do this, we can do this. Look what he did, for crying out loud. And damn. But all this is to say that Jeremy played drums.
It's amazing.
On the recent stuff that we're continuing now overdub and figuring out how we're going to fan fund or what way we're going to get this to the public, because the true miracle in 2019, as my last fan-funded solo album would attest to, is there are pockets of Jellyfish fans all over the world who are like, you got more music? Bring it on. What do you want? My checkbook's out. It just blows my mind. I'm so deeply touched. And all I want to do with the time I have left on this planet is like get as much music out there for them as possible, because that exchange, it's like, here you go, I slaved over this for 6 months. Ah, thank you.
Yeah.
I can't wait to play it for my little girl who was born 8 years ago, who knows nothing about you and barely knows anything about the Beatles. So it's great.
So what is it finished? Is it mixed? Where are you at?
We have 12 songs in various stages of completion. We're over the hump on all of them, so now we're in vocal world. And
who's the main lead vocal?
All 3 of us.
All 3 of you, great.
In fact, we will take songs and share the verse, chorus.
Your harmonies when I saw you live were unbelievable.
Thank you so much.
Especially just after seeing Guy's band.
Right.
Who were amazing.
Exactly.
And then you guys came out and just took it to the next level.
It's been a real treat to be able to not only write with Eric and Tim again, but to sing again. And frankly, to carry on where Jellyfish left off when we broke up. Because they had only been in the band for a little over a year at the time that we disbanded. I was still getting to know them as songwriters, what they were capable of musically, because in Spilt Milk, they just kind of assumed the roles of, you're the bass player, sing this part. You're the guitar player, sing this part, which they did wonderfully, but they're multi-talented, accomplished people in their own right. And so it's been great picking up the pieces and discovering how we want to present this next phase to the world.
So do you have your own studio?
No, I've had various workrooms. I had a nice, wonderful little basement in Woodland Hills where I had all my giant antique keyboard collection surrounding me. It was my little fortress.
I did an interview with Taylor Locke a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
Do you still have stuff over at his place?
I still do, yes, because I've been in between places. So Taylor's been kind enough to house a lot of my stuff. Another friend has the rest of it. And I'm currently building out a portion of my home that's going to be able to house more of this stuff. But drum ISOs and things like that are not part of my immediate realm for whatever reason, and that's okay. I've been, right? Every friend I've got's got some version of a home studio backyard situation that, is. It's just so incredible here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, LA home studios are a little different. When you say to somebody, like my house at my studio, they think they're going to see a laptop, and then they come in and see an SSL.
Right.
They're like,
full console.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
We're all a little obsessive.
Yeah. Well, and in part, over the years, I certainly became gear obsessed with the vast world, even to me, I didn't realize how vast it was, of vintage keyboards. Of the last, 7 decades, and really enjoyed the history of synthesis, that part that I was too young to participate in, the part I've been able to participate in, sampling, all of it, and as it's continued to evolve. So I've really enjoyed collecting and using those tools in the music I make. But the world of engineering and capturing sound in its best possible state, and all those schools of thought, while fascinated by it and appreciate it to, such a degree, and realize its value, have never had the patience to sit down and I'm going to learn how to work an 1176 top to bottom and maximize it. You have to have the passion and desire to sit there with every piece of gear and know how they all interface and how to do that.
I relate. I relate because if you do something really, really well, you put that pressure on yourself that you don't want to do something else unless you can do it to the same level.
Yes.
It's like you're an amazing keyboard player, so if you wanted to be an engineer, you'd probably feel emotionally like you have to suspend the rest of your life for about 4 years to get to a level that you could record your own stuff. And where do you find that time?
It is time, and it's also, I've mostly learned, particularly out of college, that I was going to be the most fulfilled, and lo and behold, gain the most employment and financial sustenance from things that I was passionate about. And it had to be harnessing my passions first. Now, I've never started a family, so I didn't have children early on to be concerned about, of course I've taken jobs because money was involved. There's absolutely a capitalist part of me, and right, it's all, I have to bring enough money in to be able to do all those things continually that bring true fulfillment. And so, but I'm very blessed. I mean, so much of the work I've done has also been creatively fulfilling. But I never had that desire to it's instinctual. Okay, songwriting, keyboard playing, harmonizing, there's always been this affinity for it. Skateboarding. I love skateboarding and snowboarding. Well, those sports drew me over other sports. I don't know why. It was just kind of this, I just allowed it. That looks amazing. That looks cool. I'm going there. What that guy's doing with the long hair and the cape, twiddling knobs in front of that little keyboard that's only like 3 octaves, there's something that's alluring to that. Then it's no different than you see an attractive girl walking down the street. You're just like, and you don't, it's instinctual. So I've tried to just stay true to that stuff. And this incredible world, which, I know how powerful it is. I know how amazing it can make my ideas and emotions arrive in another's ears, has never been part of the puzzle to me, other than here and there. I mean, I can hold my own and whatever, but not like some of my friends, and certainly your realm.
But the great thing about production, though, is done right, it's all of these things. I think a role of a producer is a little bit like a director. I remember somebody asking Tim Burton, was he a great director, or what would he consider? I can't remember the exact question, but he answered with, I wouldn't know a good script if it hit me in the head. And so there's a guy that creates like a visual feast that everybody loves Tim Burton's movies. They look so beautiful, but like he said, would know a good script if it hit him. He needs somebody else to tell him it's a good script to do a movie. And I think that's the great thing about production, is like if you're a musician and a songwriter, you can come into the role as producer and bring tons of stuff. Now I think there's this sort of idea that a producer is just somebody who knows how to operate their DAW really well, which can be a big part of it, especially in certain genres. But the music that we're talking about, that we grew up loving, there was a bit of a separation. There was a guy or a girl that was a producer that was able to connect the dots together. You know, in all reality, a guy like Rick Rubin, you know, love him or hate him, one of his skills is he always hires the right people. He'll be like, oh, Jim Scott, be the engineer. And I've seen him work. He goes into a room and does pre-production for 6 months with the Chili Peppers. So when they come in to record, all he needs is an engineer, because he's already figured out the timing, the arrangement, you know, tempo, everything. Everything is figured out in before. So my long statement is just to say, like, you know, because you got co-production on Spilt Milk. And I think I want to know a little bit about that record. We could probably do a separate sequence on both those records, which I think we should. So stay tuned for those.
More to come.
More to come. But now as a producer, when you're working with artists, and also obviously you bring incredible songwriting to it, what do you do? Do you find yourself like doing pre-production in your room? You're sitting with keys, you're working on parts, you then take it. I don't know. I want to know a bit more about your process.
For realizing a record, whether it's mine or anybody else's? Yeah, let's see. I mean, really it's assessing, so
because you must be you're based around getting great players, getting them in the room, I assume. Is that something that's really important to you?
Yes and no. I mean, so I have a philosophy that I've amassed over the years. It's, you know, you start in the business with like, this is how it's done. Yeah. This is how my heroes did it. And then you learn real quick, oh my God, there's no right way to get to the finish line. And for everybody that you think had this big chart out and it was calculated and systematically done this, and certainly they had a game plan and they're so brilliant, it's like you realize that half the people in that room or more just stumbled into it. They just fell. It was like happy accident after happy accident after happy accident. And so Eno's got his method, and Tommy Dowd has his method, and Albie Galutin had his method, and Max Martin has his method. You know, I mean, it's on and on and on. For me, song is king. And you couldn't fake it back in the day. In other words, you sold the song to the jaded A&R guy or the producer or whoever by sitting down at the piano and singing it, or strumming the guitar and singing it. If you couldn't hear the kernel of genius in that, because once you have that, you just fill in the blanks. Just connect the dots. And I mean, this is what I believe. And a good song reigns supreme. So even when we're listening to Beatles records and we praise George Martin and all the incredible people they had at their disposal, that's putting frosting on an already solid cake, right? Mm-hmm. That's all I've ever tried to do. So when I've teamed up with people like Andy Sturmer, Eric Dover, over the years, you just sit there and you hash it out until you both leave the room and you go, nobody can tell me that that's not kicking butt, period. No girlfriends, my parents, my friends, record company, fans. If we're not totally sold on the idea as the co-creators, then it's not even worth trying to develop it further. It's not we're trying to find the good producer, good engineer, good art director, video director, etc. So that's what I always try to rely on. And we're living in an age now, I don't have to tell you, where a drum beat can suffice as the hook of a song. Now, I'm not diminishing that. I'm not saying that's wrong. That's not what got me into this world. That's not what inspired me. Love good drum grooves. Love good drummers. Love well-recorded drum sets. that to me is not the be-all, end-all. That's not what I'm striving for as the finish line. And while all those things are terribly important to a finished product. So whoever I'm put in a room with, whether it's to write songs, produce, simply play on their record, to arrange, I try to facilitate getting that song to be the biggest earworm and catchy in all the right respects that my job role will allow me to contribute. Which, as a session keyboard player, which is primarily what I've done over the years since my band's disbanded, has been literally, Roger, good to have you here. We're gonna play the song for you. We're looking for something in the chorus. It's just not popping. Make it sound like a chorus. I am so flattered and honored to be here to help you do that. Thank you for paying me to show up and do what I can to help you. And the third thing I don't say to myself, if I believe this is, first you gotta write a chorus.
Right.
I can't save it. Nobody in this room can save it. You don't have a hook yet. Now, I'm happy to do what I can, and I know that must sound terribly arrogant, and at the end of the day, it's all opinion, right? It's completely subjective. I'm fully aware of that. But it actually makes the puzzle and challenge more fun. It's like, wow, I gotta dig deep into my bag of tricks to figure out what I can do. And that's a lot of fun. And I say that, but I've been, honored to work with and be a part of some incredible songs over the years and incredible albums and by masterful songwriters who write incredible choruses. And I'm just happy that my parts weren't left out on the cutting room floor after all was said and done, because they didn't need me, So.
You do a lot of records with Joe Ciccarelli.
Oh my God.
Who I believe his records pretty much are the best sounding records. I think between him and, I'm a big fan of Eric Valentine as well. Mm-hmm. I think those two guys, whatever they do, whatever piece of equipment they use, we always go, what, who, where, what? Well, I love going into Sunset after Joe's done a session and all his gear's still set up.
And start taking pictures?
Like, what is that EQ on the kick? And I asked David, whoever's was assisting him, and he's like, yeah, looks crazy, but listen to it. And of course, it's absolutely amazing.
Joe, having come up in the various schools that he came up in, understands the value of musicians who think like arrangers and songwriters. So, for example, one of the drummers I get to play with a lot is Victor Indrizzo via Joe Ciccarelli projects and others. Well, I know for a fact that Victor Indrizzo is one of the most unknown, brilliant songwriters living in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And drums happens to be the instrument that he has great faculty and artistry on. So when he and I are learning a new artist's songs that we're playing keyboards and drums on for a Joe project, for example, I know that Victor and I are walking into the room, we've got the chords down, we've got the rhythm down. I'm pulling up sounds, him and Joe are pulling up sounds. What Victor and I are thinking about is, how do we contribute as arrangers to these songs with these particular instruments in front of us? And that's what Sean Hurley, all the bass, when Zach Ray's in there, David Levita, all the guys. This is what we're all thinking about. And for me, I'm able to bring my version of that to the party because of my experience as a songwriter and arranger. I'm looking for ways to bring that chorus out, make it a chorus. And there are tricks in your tool bag that you have by studying the greats. What did Burt Bacharach do? What did Queen do? And you just write them all down, you shove them in your back pocket. Well, I'm gonna try my version of that now, without ripping anybody off, right? To get to that finish line. What did Pharrell Williams do? You just start collecting. And we've had so many, many, many examples. I think the challenge for a lot of musicians is, like developing any skill set, you gotta put in your time. You gotta go study the greats. So, in high school, the jazz bug bit me. And I was listening to all kinds of music, but one of the musics I was listening to and aspiring to discover and explore in great depth was jazz. bebop and cool from the 40s, 50s, and really when it starts taking off in the 60s and 70s, so that era of jazz. And I went deep with the Chick Coreas and Herbie Hancocks and Bill Evanses and Richard Byracks and Jan Hammers, and there's so many. And it was very clear to me that this was artistry of a Zen-like nature, where like any skill, whether you're a great sports player, a great architect, a great investment banker, a great on and on and on, you immerse yourself in the art, you digest and you swallow and you consume all that you can from the vast eras of history that you have, being born in the era we were born. You relate to some communities and schools more than others, and you regurgitate, and naturally it'll be a natural byproduct of what you like. You'll have your version of it is naturally going to come out. So the way I studied jazz is the way I studied my pop songwriting, is the way I studied my arrangers, is the way I studied keyboard programming, is the way I studied the instrumentation, on and on and on. And I'm still studying it. I'm not saying I've mastered anything. My point is that when I then kind of started participating in the real world, whether it was with Jellyfish or as a freelance accompanist, I felt I didn't just have one bag of tricks. I had 10, 20 bags of tricks and was hoping to continue to accumulate more and more. And there's great empowerment in that.
Absolutely.
And such a freedom when someone says, here's a song you've heard for the first time. We look to your experience to help decorate it. Well, first of all, that's just the greatest compliment in the world, that someone would even give a damn. And then you're like, okay, I better rise to the occasion. Clock's ticking, money's at stake, and I want to do good for these friends and strangers who seem to give a damn, you know? And to be able to, it almost feels like you have a superpower, and I'm always looking for ways to add to that superpower. And so it's been, and what your proclivities are and affinities are may not be right for everybody in the room. They may not be particularly in fashion this week, right? So just because you can do blah, 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 doesn't mean that's what's charting right now, if one's playing in a pop realm or whatever. The jazzers can do jazz for the rest of eternity. There's always going to be a faction that wants to hear, you know, the fast bebop, the post-bebop world, post-gospel, all that stuff that continues. I mean, fusion, jazz rock has not changed in the last 40 to 50 years.
Sure.
But different generations keep coming through. So, right, so they're operating in classicism. Just like there's an avant classical world that happens, but people still keep reinterpreting the greats, right? We keep hearing Mozart and Bach and everybody be performed ad infinitum. I was always interested by the evolution of pop song stylings. And to me, although there were only 12 pitches, melodies were as endless as there were human beings on the world. The fact that Brian Wilson, Paul McCartney, and Burt Bacharach existed simultaneously, and in my opinion, their apexes were all simultaneous, and wrote vastly differently from each other, and Jimmy Webb, for that example. Sure. We could go on and on and on. Harry Nilsson, right? I mean, Randy Newman, there's such a treasure trove. They're all operating within the same sphere, these same confines, and couldn't have been more different from each other. Each making a hugely unique statement. That's all I ever wanted to do.
That's amazing.
That's why I'm still here.
I'm so glad. I mean, I could have stopped you at any particular time and taken any one of these moments off into a conversation, but I will. When you said Jimmy Webb, it's like, it depends on the day, you know, what my top 10 favorite songs are. But Wichita Lineman's always in the top 10.
Oh, God. Yeah.
It's just, I mean, what a masterpiece. What a masterpiece.
And wasn't he couldn't have been a day over 22 or 23 or something?
Something stupid like that.
He's ridiculous. I think a lot of his hits charted before he was while he was still a teenager. Not unlike Laura Nyro and Carole King.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing. And when those types of aliens have walked our planet inspiring, sorry if you think I'm a hard ass, but there's no excuse.
Yeah.
If they can do it, we can do it. You can do it. These different generations can do it. That's how good it can be. Those were always my drugs. Of course I explored. Nothing gave me the fix that an Andy Partridge melody and song structure that I couldn't get out of my ear, it would haunt me in my sleep. I was like, I want more of that. How do I get that fix? You got to put in your time. You got to go study it. You have to learn the architecture of it. Becoming a great painter, becoming a great sculptor, becoming a great ball player, whatever it is. And I'm very thankful that somehow that was instilled in me. I guess I look to my parents, you know. I always tell this little kind of famous joke story that when I joined Beck's band, it was right after Mellow Gold and Odelay, and he was coming off the huge success of Loser, and you know, particularly off Loser, he'd been labeled as like the sound of the slacker generation. Sure. It was kind of a chill, kind of folk, post-hippie, groovy tune, right? Everybody's like, what's he like, man? I mean, he must be like a total, like, you know, stoner, like easy, chill guy writing these like kind of loopy folk songs. I go, nope.
They obviously didn't know who his dad was.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Nor did I at the time.
Right.
And I go, more than anybody I've ever worked with, his work ethic is so deep and so passionate that it in turn inspires me. And music just happens to be one of the areas he's fascinated by and has practiced. But he's so worldly and so versed in so many aspects of the arts and has studied many. He's such a complex human being for deciding, hey, I think my voice can be heard through like radio, you know, or the pop fair, if you will. And the fact that I've been invited into his fold over the years and been a part of his music making team goes back to what I was telling you earlier about being true to yourself. Because I can't think of another contemporary artist that meets and fulfills my needs as a fellow songwriter and collaborator and music maker, because his scope is so vast and wide, including the record making process of sonics, gear. You know, I mean, he has stories of Steely Dan level putting mixers, you know, through the whatever the phrase is, through the I don't know what the cliche is, I don't remember, you know, through the grinder or whatever. I mean, it's like, nope, do it again.
I was
nope, do it again.
I was a consultant at Capitol for a couple of years, and I can't remember what the name of the song was. It was the Super Disco one that came out about 3 years ago.
From Beck?
Yeah. I'm sure you worked on it.
Maybe. Yeah. It's all a blur.
And I think it was mastered by 5 different people till he chose the master that he liked.
Yeah. And that's not BS. He
No,
absolutely is studied. He absolutely can tell the difference.
And they had me edit like different arrangement choices to make it into a single. The song was about 7 minutes long. And it was like, no, I want to hear this, I want to hear that, I want to hear this. So I was just like sending like MP3s backwards and forwards of all the different arrangement ideas for the single. Because the label obviously wanted 3-minute 20, and he was like, okay, show me.
Yep.
So,
well, and that's what the legends of Steely Dan are like that. And it's like, both those guys were jazzers.
Right.
They came from the meticulous study of the craft of jazz. Then rock and roll bit them in the butt, like a lot of people their age group, and they found this weird hybridization of rock and jazz on their own terms, which was, I'm still fascinated by their sound, and they're not for everyone, but
oh no, I love Steve.
My God, the success that they had with that very odd, weird, very jazzy. It was almost like modern swing, right? But of course, it didn't swing.
Sure.
It had.
They also had like the Beach Boys in it.
What's that?
You also had the Beach Boys in it. You remember the first time I heard "Do It Again"?
Yeah.
We're all like, "This is the Beach Boys, but jazz."
I know. The
Reeling in the ears,
cross-pollination.
reeling in the ear. You're like, wait, is this jazz Beach Boys? What is this?
I know,
We couldn't
exactly.
figure it out, but we loved it.
And I still go back to those records to appreciate the sonics. I still am in awe of obvious Massenburg recordings like the Earth, Wind and Fire albums he did. Because I love the fact that people like him and Roger Nichols and stuff, and another guy on the rock tip who I have my mind blown, I've only recently discovered like in the last 10 years, is Jay Messina. You familiar with him?
Yep.
Everybody had the same gear. Everybody was in front of the same rough, 3 or 4 tape machines and consoles and Pultecs and blah, 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 blah. And some people's stuff sounds light years beyond others. And it's 3D and it's got airs moving and all those things. That
Jack Douglas was here for 6 hours yesterday.
Oh my God.
So we had a lot of conversations about that. And when I first met Jay, after he left the room, I was like, that's a real engineer, because I was engineering Aerosmith. I felt very intimidated.
Man, right. Because
Yeah.
those records that he graced,
They're amazing.
Jack graced, are just, yeah. And, it's no lie. Andy and I and Jason in our youth in Jellyfish, we had our opinions, we were opinionated, we had our likes and dislikes, and of course, we were all still learning as we entered that world. But I used to have such fun with Jack and Albie, all of us did. We'd bring in something that they would assume we were into, like a Beach Boys track, or listen to the harmonies here on this Emmett Rhodes thing that he did at home on his little 8-track 1-inch or whatever. And then the next day, I'd bring in a track from Toys in the Attic.
Yeah.
I go, why do those stereo Les Pauls sound so well together? And but listen to how the bass is sculpted. Jack's going, how do you know about this stuff? I go, I don't just listen to Toto. Do you want
to know why those guitars sound like that?
Please.
Jack told us yesterday. I think this is going to come out after the Jack video. Stereo pi compressor. Both the guitars went through, because they're tracked at the same time, through the stereo pi compressor.
Got it.
So they have that little dance because they're interacting with each other when they were tracking.
Right. Well, that's brilliant.
And you go back and listen to it. There's
Because it's Joe and Brad at the same time.
At the same time,
right.
yeah. When you get walks, you go down, 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 down.
So the compressor ends up being
it's kind of dancing between the two.
Very important glue.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't find that out until yesterday. I was like, how do you? Because we were listening to the stems. I'm like, how do you get these guitars to dance with each other? They're like not in time and not out of time. They just work together. He goes, oh, it's because it's the compressor, like nudging them backwards and forwards.
See? And yeah. So that's what keeps me excited to be alive and making music, is finding out gems like that.
You know what I was thinking for one thing? I didn't stop you talking about it when you mentioned Victor. First time I ever worked with Victor, we're doing this, we're talking about music and stuff. I was like, well, who's your favorite drummers? He went, Ringo Starr and Stevie Wonder. And I was like, I knew then he was going to be perfect, because they're both total song drummers. Like,
exactly.
It's totally like the best song drummers ever.
And
I mean, which drummer would you meet apart from somebody like Victor that would say Stevie Wonder was his favorite drummer?
Well, exactly. And just to lean on that point for a second, understanding, look, man, I was reared on the Simon Phillipses and the Steve Gadds and all these cats, and I still love them. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to hire them necessarily to back up one of my pop songs, simply because of the aesthetic. That doesn't mean they can't do it. It's just it's different flavors, and there's different things. It's the old. I'm not opposed to a lot of notes. I'm not opposed to 16 to 30-second notes. It's what are you saying with that? Because if you can get away with just saying it with 3 notes, it's all about how are you conveying it, So that's been I've always had like one foot in each world, because I love the jazzers and they inspire me, and I hack around at my own version of it, because I never took the time to take it to that level. I can't go down to the baked potato and jam with my friends. It's just not going to happen.
We're going to hang with Jeff Lorber.
I mean, I can sit in and play some good like funk clavinet behind him, but when it's time for me to shred, I'm not going to embarrass myself, because I can't do that thing. I do some faux version of it. But there's this beautiful era of pop music, again of the late '60s, early '70s, where so much of that wrecking crew body of musicians that are playing on all these incredible pop records, they're all jazzers, and rock comes in from England, changes the whole game. It's like it's all rock now. British invasion, man. We're not swinging anymore. We're playing backbeat, and this guy Ringo's leading the way, and this Hendrix trio. Well, Cream, Hendrix trio, it's all jazz basically, right? You can't. Mitch Mitchell, those are jazzers.
Yeah.
John Bonham, jazzers.
Ginger Baker. Solo comes in, he goes to the right. No rock guy did that before.
Ian Pace, for crying out loud. That world to me is it's the greatest hybridization. It's the coming together of so many things that I love all at once. And that's not to discount what then happens with punk that says, we're going to tear that all down. Because what's driving that is this incredible angst, but they haven't forgotten. I was 7, 8 years old when the Beatles happened, when all these incredible songs are being written. So it's still in my DNA.
Yeah, but you listen to the Kingsmen and you listen to the Sex Pistols. What's more punk?
Good point. And like one of my favorite bands, when people ask me, come on, top 5, people either don't know who I'm talking about or they're in awe when I say The Damned.
Love it. First album's amazing.
Oh my God! And they've actually continued to write really good music in their later albums.
And that actually came out before the Pistols.
Yes, which I've discovered over time. But the fusion of is all this great post-'60s pop writing with punk angst and humor, infusing a sense of humor.
So you're touching on something I have a very, very strong opinion on, because two things, when it comes to the Wrecking Crew period of the mid-late 60s through the early 70s, I think the West Coast of America owns some of the best production, best songwriting ever. And we've touched on it in little moments with Jimmy Webb, the American Trilogy with Galveston as well. By the time I get to Phoenix, Wichita, those are 3 of the greatest songs ever written. My personal favorite period of music, and I'm not discounting any of the other stuff, my personal favorite is, and you can argue about the beginning, but say about 74, 75, mid-70s to mid-80s is actually my favorite period. Not because I don't like all of the influences, everything comes from it, but I feel like that was the golden time, and we were lucky because we grew up in that period.
Smack dab,
because you had the punk rock, the new wave that we're talking about, which includes obviously where XTC went to, but you also have talk about Queen for a second. You had them from Night of the Opera through to The Game, which is just, what is the genre of The Game? Is it Crazy Little Thing Called Love? Is it Another One Bites the
What's
Dust?
going on?
Is it Dragon Attack? Is it,
I know.
What's going on? But then you also have, my hairs are standing on end, you also have Bowie's finest stuff in there. You have Heroes, and then you have, of course, Scary Monsters, which I still think is probably top 5 greatest
You guys gave us
ever.
early goth.
Yeah.
Those Susie and the Banshee albums.
Oh, Susie and the Banshee.
John McGeoch, to this day, is one of the most unheralded, brilliant guitar
Don't
contributors.
do this to me.
Ever.
Don't do this to me. I went to see the Armory show in '83, and nobody knew who they were. Because it was John, and it was the singer who killed himself, unfortunately. And John just died just a few years ago of cancer. I didn't know until I looked him up. So, hey, I wonder if I can get him on the show. That's how out of touch I am, and found out he died. But that was the guy from Big Country and the Skids.
Oh, right, that's right.
With John playing guitar. And it was like '83, showing my age. And I remember seeing him, and he had a Marshall half stack, JCM 800 with a JC 120. And John McGeoch. And it was just like, yeah, he was amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. For me, yeah, him, and then Smiths on the first record. I went to Jubilee Park and saw the Smiths play GLC Free Festival. I'm right at the front as a kid. I'm 16 years old, and he's playing a Gretsch Country Gentleman, and I didn't know what it was. I'm like, this guy's playing guitar like nobody plays guitar like that. And then I had to go back and discover all of the finger-picking American stuff, and took me back to Reverend Gary Davis, and I'm like filling in all the gaps.
Wow, I don't know who that is, so something for me to go listen to.
It's sort of more blues, gospel-based, but finger-picking as opposed to...
Well,
but
Echo and the Bunnymen.
Echo and the Bunny. But then the bigger production stuff, Peter Gabriel. All absolutely masterpieces. Kate Bush. It got Hounds of Love in '85.
Yep.
I mean, what a record.
Thomas Dolby's prefab Sprout Records in the mid-'80s.
It is insane. Because to me, it's like the perfect pinnacle of musicianship, production, and the fact that it was just close enough to the Beatles that everybody still wanted to write an amazing song.
They still valued an original hook, lyrical, that I always say, okay, we've arrived at the chorus. Am I going to cry out in sorrow, or am I going to cry out in joy? The point is, I better cry out. And
Right.
you invite the sing-along. And that's just less valued now.
Yep.
And
You know, I've got because I don't want to forget this. Think about "Turn It On Again" by Genesis. That was a worldwide top 10 single.
I know.
Bam, bam, bam. I mean,
And
sections in 7/4, and then you don't really get you get a hook all the way through, and then in the end you get another turn it on, turn it on, turn it. At the end,
we already have 3 men on bass. Now we have to drive it home. It's like,
we were listening to that the other day here. I was playing the guys the track. I'm like, this was a single. This was a top 10 worldwide hit. This is what radio used to be like.
and I took it for granted.
Yeah, we all did.
I grew up in that.
Yeah.
Talking Heads and Blondie and
Remain
Peter
in Line.
Gabriel were all on the radio. I remember
At the same time.
I remember being a little kid growing up a suburb of the Bay Area, listening to AM, everyman, it was BBC One, just like straight up generic everyman rock. I mean, half the playlist had probably been paola'd into existence. The point was, while being driven to school by our neighbors, I would hear a Lynyrd Skynyrd song back to back with Gary Newman, back to back with the heaviest funk song from I don't know, Chic or Earth, Wind & Fire or something.
Yeah.
In the course of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
What variety? What the variety and yet wealth of inspiration that just clobbered me on the way to school that morning was something that I thought would always be present in popular music.
I think another interesting in England, and you were over touring in this period. There was also another really interesting thing that was going alongside with the Britpop stuff in the early mid-90s. It was also we had like Massive Attack and Portishead.
Hell yes, you did.
And it was just insane. It's still, to me, those bands still sound like the future.
I know.
They actually sound like the future because you can tell that they're keyboard orientated, they're sample based, but they have feel.
Yep.
And because it seems to be that one of the difficult things in what we do in production is trying to marry the world of organic instruments with programmed instruments. And that's still sort of the holy grail. It's why when the Killers came out on that first record, it blew up worldwide because it had a dance element. It sounded like they were into dance music, EDM as people like to call it. But they also were a band. So it was like a home run because everybody could love it. You could be an indie rock kid and also you could go and dance to the music. But it seems like that is the holy grail, and nobody's really done it or isn't able to do it. I think even on a technical level, it's like, do you take the band and make it fit with the program stuff? Do you make the program stuff with? There's always
super challenging.
It's really challenging to get right.
Even as software gets better, as everything continues to give you more options, right? Because what we're talking about is the elusiveness of the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
As my girlfriend, who wasn't a musician, way back when, used to say, how do 5... we're going to edit piles of this.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
I should have signed a non-disclosure or something before I did this interview, because now you own me. But she used to say, how the hell do 5 morons make such incredible music? How do they...
He didn't say that, his ex-girlfriend did.
They're all clumsily they're falling over each other, and the beauty that results on the other end of that is literally untangible. And they did it album after album, genre after genre. The Rolling Stones exploring disco in the late 70s is one of the most fascinating, rewarding things ever given to us.
I'll be your knight in shining armor. Yeah.
Man,
Emotional
it's like,
rescue, yeah.
it's an enigma.
Yeah.
And that is the all elusive thing, because, right, the best producers in the world, it's their job to capture that, to not dilute it, this is what the Glenn Johns of the world has seemed to be so incredible at.
We were talking about the other day, I was driving with the guys, Jimmy Miller, who produced Exile on Main Street.
He produced a buttload of their records.
Buttload of their records. And I'm going to get the story wrong, but this is the approximation. You can go on Wikipedia later. I think it was a year-ish, either a little bit short or a little bit over. He leaves the record after like 3 months in being in France, because that was back in the day before the EC, European Community, where they were tax exiles. If they left, if they lived outside of England for a certain amount of period of time, they didn't have to pay the British taxes. So he leaves the record, I don't remember the exact thing, like 3 months into it. Like, you guys are all getting wasted, you're not focused. Leaves, and then comes back like another 3 or 6 months later and finishes up the album. And it's just the sort of insanity that goes around it. But then put on Exile on Main Street, and it's mind-bogglingly brilliant. It's an absolute masterpiece from beginning to end.
Yes.
And I remember...
And sonically, in its lo-fi DIY guys in a room kind of thing. We're at the blues shack just hanging out, and that tiny little jazz kit that he's playing somehow sounds like a monstrosity, but it's still only right here in the mix. And just all that stuff is just so endlessly fascinating. How much of it was conscious or not? Happy accidents, who knows? Limitations, but... Yeah,
I think... look, there's an A80 over there, so I have a tape machine. I've made...
Oh, that's what that is?
Yeah, exactly. I've made so many records on tape. I'm not that guy. I'm not like, it has to be a tube, it has to be a tape, it has to be a U47. I mean, I've got those things and they get used regularly, but they're not the reason why a song is good or bad. But the one beautiful thing, and I've said this and I'm sure you've said exactly what I'm about to say 1,000 times, the one beautiful thing about tape is you couldn't fix it, at least not on an individual track basis. So you had to go and listen back and go, I'm on top, I better lay back. And it was the fact that it forced you to interact with those other musicians. And the beauty, I remember recently working with Leland Sklar, and we tracked live in Sunset, and he came back for the playback, and he goes, I want to punch in bar 3 of the second verse. And I was like, I'll just move it. And he's like, no, I want to punch it in. And he went back in and just punched in the one note, got out, and came back in again. And we were on Pro Tools. I could have literally picked it up and nudged it back. It was the one note that was in front of the kick of the whole song that he played, a 5-minute track. That's how beautiful Lee is. But that kind of mentality, that's what was beautiful about tape. It was if it wasn't working, on a Stones level, I'm sure they just did it again. Does it feel good? It feels good. Now we'll move on. Yep.
Well, so you had the more improvisational, spontaneous side of like the making of a Stones album. Yeah. But then you had Arif Mardin making a Chaka Khan record or something, and it's a legit session date, and we're going to track the bed of this record in 2 days. So he's hiring all the younglings to do all the rhythm arrangements. Everything's charted. So it sounds like a bunch of guys just like grooving, playing through the chord changes. I've seen those charts. I've had friends who work with these people. It's all written out. They're reading. Now, of course, somebody may interject. I'm not saying it wasn't open to interpretation, having fun with it, but you didn't have the luxury of jamming out the tune on a date like that, and it had better sound like you'd written it. That you had been playing it on tour for months, and that's a whole skill in and of itself. And
or anybody to play with Dylan.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that, which song is it? Subterranean Homesick Blues? Isn't that the only take? I think that's the one.
That is probably the legend, yes.
I think that's the story, that he just starts playing the song and the song tumbles in because they're all learning it as they play it.
Right.
I could be the wrong song, and I'm very prepared to be wrong. But when I read his Chronicles, Volume 1, I don't know if there's ever been a Volume 2, but when I read that, he admits all of his failures. It's an amazing book if you haven't read it, or if anybody watching hasn't read it. It has absolutely no chronological order. He goes like, I was born in 1974 and then 62, but it makes sense when you're reading it.
Wow.
Because and also you end up loving him because he talks about all these different characters from such a place of love and owns what he got from every single person he's ever worked with, what he gained from it. It's a really great book. But yeah, he talks about it all the time. Like the famous Live Aid thing, where he gets up with Keith and Ronnie and they play acoustic. And you remember it's just a train wreck?
I don't, but
it's a total train wreck. And they're all like staring at, he's staring at Bob's fingers.
And that doesn't surprise me, yeah.
They rehearsed 3 songs. When he goes up on stage, he plays 3 different ones.
Where are those people?
So that's why, if you read the book, he's like, oh yeah, so I decided, I wanted to change the songs.
That's so good.
Thanks, Bob.
I'm so blessed in that one of my main employers and friend has been Beck over the years. And he, by full admission, he goes, I grew up hearing a trained musician in my household. I had friends who were accomplished musicians. And one of the things I learned from them out of the gate was, if I learn all the same traditional stuff they're learning, it's likely I won't have a voice of my own. I'll be able to copy really good. Because he goes, I lived in fear of losing my originality because I would become a good copier. And that wasn't being disrespectful to the brilliance around him. That's what he took away from it. So he deliberately did not take traditional guitar lessons or keyboard lessons or whatever. He's completely self-taught or picking up here and there from friends or whatever. But the mastermind that oversees the production of a song or whatever, he's all about capturing that spontaneity and values spontaneity and improv within a pop setting as a jazz musician would. And when I first started working with him early on, I was appalled and was like, I don't know what to do with this. I mean, he'd put up a song and they're just rolling Pro Tools. What keyboard do you want to, I'd pull up some weird old vintage. Oh, I've never seen one of those. That looks amazing. And I'm listening to the song and I'm trying to dial in a tune. I have an idea of maybe what I want to try and I'm coming up with some sounds and I'm just plinking on the keyboard. Okay, we're loosely in this key. I'm finding my key center because I'm about to, what I think, I'm going to improvise some ideas over his song. We get to the end of the song and I go, hey, roll that back. Yeah. Let me hear it again.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. And Beck's like, no, we're good. I go, what are you talking about? I go, I got everything I need. I go, I don't even know your song yet. He goes, yeah, just fine. Because he was, I guess, was appreciating my mind like floating and searching and navigating through, and I had enough musicianship going that I was, mostly with the feel and groove and key center of the song, and he was looking for these little moments to kind of poke through from the keyboards. And that one afternoon with him, it just like spoke volumes to me. I was like, there's no one way to skin a cat to, get to the finish line. It's all valid because he's the master painter, right? And I've continued to learn many a lesson from him and the wealth of people I've had the privilege of being in a room with. And so it's been coming to peace with my amount of training as both a great asset and a potential distraction from essence and concept. And I'm always fascinated by what, Roger, list your favorite 20 artists. And if I, in a pop realm or whatever, and I go through and I go, oh my God, maybe 1 or 2 of those people are a trained musician. Mm-hmm. They're all art school conceptualists. Or we take the Talking Heads, for example. They're like a definitive example. And there's something incredible about a mind that can go, well, we love James Brown and Parliament Funkadelic, but we aren't as trained as them, but we can see the big picture of what makes their music great and the essence of that. So I'm Tina Weymouth and I'm going to pick up the bass, and I'm not Bootsy Collins. I'm the first to admit that, but I'm going to try to distill the essence of Bootsy Collins and spit it back out through my little Mustang Fender bass. And what a gift Tina Weymouth is to the world of bass players.
She's such a sweetheart. Her and Chris.
And you see the essence of what I'm talking about. That's what ultimately fascinates me. Because the rarity is to have a Phil Collins who can have one side of his humanity is one of the greatest progressive rock drummers and fusion drummers that ever lived. And then he can write these incredible, catchy pop tunes that have nothing to do with his jazz prog world.
Must be some misunderstanding.
And then of course the last era of Genesis, he kind of somehow fuses those worlds.
Oh yeah, it's genius.
And his bandmates follow him.
I'm a Genesis everything fan. I love it when they're 18.
Yeah, I pretty much am too.
I love it when they're 18 and they're Charterhouse kids and they're super intellectual and they're playing insane prog rock. And then I love them when they're writing pop songs. But even then, in like 5/4.
Well, I relate.
I love it all.
I mean, that's pretty much been my trajectory.
Right.
Of course, all the vast harmony and playing notes real fast and all the intricacies and the intellectualism of music. There's almost a knee-jerk reaction. Well, it's personality types. Obviously, that's what appealed to me. And then I started realizing, I realized, oh my God, I'm listening to, The Wind and the Weathering and the first Madonna album at the same time. And both are fulfilling me for different reasons and similar reasons. And that's what's so exciting, and that's what's kept me around. And I'm just thankful there's been folks like Beck who seem to continue to value those things over the years.
Marvelous. I think let's wrap this one up and let's do another one. So you have to stay tuned because I want to do... you fancy talking about belly button?
As much as you want.
Come back, because we're going to talk about belly button.
Please join us.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Warren.
If you've got any comments and questions, please leave them below. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks for having me.